The sound of the gavel in courtroom 302 didn't just signal order, it signaled the end of a career, and the beginning of a nightmare for Officer Mark Remington. He sat in the defendant's chair, leaning back with the arrogant smirk of a man who believed the badge on his chest was a shield against consequences. He thought this was just another excessive force complaint. He thought the woman he pinned to the concrete, the one whose face he ground into the pavement while she gasped for air, was just another helpless civilian he could bully into silence. He was wrong. He didn't know that the woman sitting across the aisle, nursing a fractured cheekbone and a bruised jaw, wasn't just a victim. She was Special Agent Maya Sterling, and she wasn't just there to testify. She was there to close the trap. What happens when a predator realizes he just attacked the apex predator? You're about to find out. The air conditioning in the Superior Court of Fulton County was humming loudly, but it did nothing to cut the thick, stifling tension hanging over the room. It was the third day of the State vs. Remington, a case that had already ignited a powder keg of public opinion outside the courthouse steps. Inside, however, the atmosphere was deceptively calm, sterilized by the wooden panels and the rigid procedures of the law. Officer Mark Remington sat at the defense table, his posture relaxed, almost bored. He was a large man, standing 6'3" with a build that suggested heavy hours at the gym and a diet of protein shakes. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him a little too tightly around the shoulders, a subtle reminder of his physical dominance. He wasn't in uniform today, but he wore a lapel pin of the thin blue line flag, a signal to the jury and the gallery of where his loyalties lay. To his right sat his attorney, Thomas Wainwright. Wainwright was a man who looked like he had been carved out of expensive soap, smooth, slippery, and smelling faintly of lavender and old money. He was known in the state for getting cops off the hook. He had a batting average that made prosecutors weep, usually by digging up dirt on victims until the jury felt the police violence was justified. Remington leaned over to Wainwright, whispering loud enough for the front row of the gallery to hear. "Look at her. She's still wearing the neck brace. It's theatrics, Tom. Pure theatrics." Wainwright didn't look up from his legal pad. "Quiet, Mark. Let the jury see you somber. Stop smiling." Across the aisle, at the prosecution table, sat the woman Remington was talking about. Maya Sterling didn't look at him. She sat with a stillness that was almost unnatural. She wore a sharp navy blazer, her hair pulled back in a severe, professional bun. The neck brace was indeed there, as was a fading, distinctive purple-yellow bruise tracing the line of her left cheekbone, disappearing into her hairline. She wasn't taking notes. She wasn't whispering to the prosecutor, Sarah Jenkins. She was simply staring at the empty witness stand, her dark eyes unreadable. To the untrained eye, Maya looked like a broken victim. She looked small compared to Remington. But Sarah Jenkins, the fierce district attorney leading the charge, knew better. Jenkins adjusted her glasses and glanced at her client. She knew that beneath that composure was a highly trained operative who had spent the last 5 years infiltrating drug cartels and human trafficking rings. Remington had mistaken her silence for weakness. It was, in fact, discipline. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the gallery. Judge William T. Harper entered the room. Harper was a man of the old guard, a strict constitutionalist with bushy grey eyebrows and a reputation for zero tolerance for courtroom outbursts. He took his seat, the leather chair creaking under his weight, and peered over his spectacles. "Be seated," Harper grumbled. "We are resuming with the opening arguments from the defense. Mr. Wainwright, the floor is yours." Remington smirked again. This was the part he liked. This was the part where Wainwright would spin the story, where they would paint Maya Sterling not as a woman walking to her car, but as a threat, as a suspect, as someone who failed to comply. Remington had done this a dozen times before. The internal affairs complaints always vanished. The body cam footage always had technical glitches or was inconclusive. He looked at the jury, 12 ordinary citizens. He saw a middle-aged woman in a floral dress, a construction worker, a retired teacher. He knew how to play them. He just had to look like the hero protecting their streets. He had no idea that the file sitting on the prosecutor's desk contained not just the incident report, but a sealed envelope from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Thomas Wainwright stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a flourish. He walked to the center of the room, stopping just a few feet from the jury box. He made eye contact with the floral dress woman, giving her a soft, reassuring nod. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Wainwright began, his voice a smooth baritone. "We live in dangerous times. We live in a world where chaos waits around every corner, and the only thing standing between that chaos and your families is the man sitting right there." He gestured dramatically toward Remington, who did his best to look solemn and burdened by duty. On the night of October 14th, Wainwright continued, pacing slowly. Officer Remington was patrolling a high-crime area, an area known for drug distribution, violent assaults, and gang activity. He was alone. He was vigilant. Wainwright stopped and turned to look at Maya Sterling. He didn't point, but his gaze was an accusation. He encountered an individual loitering near a vehicle in a dark alleyway behind a closed warehouse. An individual wearing a hooded sweatshirt, hands concealed in pockets. An individual who, when asked to identify herself, became belligerent, combative. Maya remained statue still. Inside, her mind was replaying the tape of that night, loitering. She was walking to her undercover vehicle after a meet with an informant. Dark alleyway. It was a well-lit parking lot next to a pharmacy. "Belligerent?" she had asked, calmly. "Officer, is there a problem?" Wainwright's voice rose, filled with righteous indignation. "Officer Remington has a split second to make a decision. A split second. If he hesitates, he doesn't go home to his wife and 2 daughters. If he hesitates, a criminal might pull a weapon." When the suspect, Ms. Sterling, refused to show her hands and made a sudden movement toward her waistband, Officer Remington did what he was trained to do. He neutralized the threat. "Objection!" Sarah Jenkins shot up. "Counsel is testifying. There is no evidence of a movement toward a waistband." "Sustained," Judge Harper said, though he looked bored. "Stick to the evidence you intend to present, Mr. Wainwright." "Of course, Your Honor," Wainwright said smoothly, pivoting back to the jury. "The evidence will show that Officer Remington used standard takedown procedure. Yes, it was physical. Police work is physical. It is ugly, but it is necessary. The prosecution wants you to believe this was a hate crime. They want you to believe Officer Remington looked at Ms. Sterling and saw a race, not a threat. But the facts will tell you that he saw a suspect refusing to comply in a dangerous zone." Wainwright leaned in close to the jury rail. "Ms. Sterling claims she is a victim. But ask yourselves, why was she there? Why did she resist? And why, when Officer Remington demanded ID, did she reach into her jacket instead of putting her hands up?" He paused for effect. "This is a case of a police officer doing his job, and a tragedy resulting from non-compliance. Don't let political correctness blind you to the reality of the streets." Wainwright walked back to his table and sat down. Remington patted him on the shoulder, whispering, "Nice one. Political correctness. That always gets them." Remington felt good. The narrative was set. He was the protector. She was the defiant suspect. It was his word against hers, and in this county, the badge usually won. Judge Harper looked at the prosecution. "Ms. Jenkins, call your first witness." Sarah Jenkins stood up. She didn't look at the jury. She looked directly at Mark Remington. For a split second, Remington felt a cold prickle of unease. Her look wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was pity. "The people call Mr. David Hayes to the stand." Remington furrowed his brow. David Hayes? Who was that? He glanced at the witness list. A bystander. He remembered the street being empty. A young Asian man, maybe 22, nervous, wearing a college hoodie and jeans, walked to the stand. He was sworn in. "Mr. Hayes," Jenkins began, her voice soft. "Where were you on the night of October 14th? I was in my car," David stammered. "I was parked across the street, eating a burger. I work the night shift at the logistics center nearby." "And what did you see?" "I saw that cop," David pointed a shaking finger at Remington. "He pulled up his cruiser behind that lady's car. She was just unlocking her door. She wasn't loitering," Wainwright scribbled furiously. "Discredit the witness. Distance. Lighting." "Did you hear what was said?" Jenkins asked. "Yes, my window was down. He yelled, 'Hey, you! Get away from that car!'" "And how did Ms. Sterling respond?" "She turned around slowly," David said. "She had her keys in her hand. She said, 'Officer, this is my vehicle. Is there an issue?' Did she yell?" "No." "Did she run?" "No." "What happened next, Mr. Hayes?" David took a deep breath, looking at Remington with fear in his eyes. He didn't ask for ID. He just ran at her. He slammed her into the side of the car. I heard her head hit the metal. It made a loud thud." The courtroom went silent. "She fell down," David continued, his voice trembling, "and he jumped on her. He put his knee right on her face. She was screaming, 'I'm an agent! I'm an agent!' But he laughed." Remington's face went hot. "Laughed? I didn't laugh. Did he? Adrenaline makes you forget things." "He laughed," David repeated. "And he said, 'I don't care who you are, you belong on the ground.'" "Objection," Wainwright stood up. "Hearsay, and prejudicial language." "Overruled," Judge Harper said sharply. "The witness is recounting the event." Jenkins let the words hang in the air. He said, "You belong on the ground." "And then what?" "She stopped moving," David whispered, "and he stayed there, for a long time, just pressing his weight on her face, even after she went limp." Remington shifted in his seat. He could feel the eyes of the jury on him now. The floral dress woman wasn't looking at him with respect anymore. She was looking at his heavy boots. "Mr. Hayes?" Jenkins asked. "Did you record this encounter?" David nodded slowly. "Yes. I pulled out my phone." Remington froze. A phone? He had checked the perimeter. He hadn't seen anyone. "Your Honor," Jenkins announced, her voice ringing with steel. "The prosecution seeks to enter Exhibit A into evidence, the cell phone video recorded by Mr. David Hayes." Wainwright jumped up. "Objection. We haven't had time to analyze the authenticity of this. You received this file in discovery 3 weeks ago, Mr. Wainwright," the judge snapped. "Sit down. Play the tape." Remington felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't part of the plan. The courtroom lights were dimmed, casting long, eerie shadows against the wood-paneled walls. A large projector screen descended from the ceiling, humming softly. The silence in the room was absolute, the kind of heavy silence that precedes a disaster. Mark Remington stared at the blank screen, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple, itching, but he refused to wipe it away. He had to look stoic. He had to look innocent. "Play the file," Judge Harper ordered. The video flickered to life. It was grainy at first, low-light footage shot from across a street, but the audio was crystal clear. The silence of the night was broken by the screech of tires as Remington's cruiser swerved aggressively behind a modest sedan. On the screen, Maya Sterling stepped out of her car. She looked nothing like a threat. She looked like a woman ending a long shift. Then, Remington's voice boomed through the courtroom speakers, distorted but unmistakable. "Hey, you! Get away from that car!" In the gallery, Remington saw the jurors flinch. His voice on the tape didn't sound like a protector. It sounded like a predator. On screen, Maya turned. Her hands were visible. Empty. "Officer, this is my vehicle. Is there an issue?" Her tone was level, controlled. Remington on screen didn't answer. He charged. The video showed the violence in sickening detail. The collision of his body against hers was a dull, heavy thud that made the woman in the floral dress cover her mouth with her hand. Maya hit the car, then the pavement. Then came the moment that sucked the air out of the room. Remington, the digital version of him, dropped his knee onto Maya's face. Not her back, not her shoulder, her face. Her cheek was crushed against the asphalt. "Stop resisting!" Remington screamed on the tape, though Maya was pinned flat, motionless under his weight. Then, a strangled voice from beneath his knee. I can't breathe. I am a federal agent. Badge is in jacket." The courtroom gasped. It was audible, a collective intake of breath. Remington on the tape laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "Yeah? And I'm the Queen of England. Shut the hell up, junkie." He pressed harder. The camera zoomed in slightly. David Hayes had steady hands. You could see the side of Maya's face distorting under the pressure of the boot and shin. You could see her hand tapping the pavement. A universal signal of submission. Remington ignored it. He kept his knee there for 3 minutes and 45 seconds. When the video finally ended, showing backup arriving and handcuffing a semi-conscious Maya, the lights in the courtroom flickered back on. Nobody moved. Sarah Jenkins, the prosecutor, stood up slowly. She didn't need to shout. The video had screamed for her. "Officer Remington," she said, addressing the empty air as she looked at the jury, testified in his report that the suspect was thrashing and reaching for a weapon. You just saw the truth. He didn't see a weapon. He didn't see a threat. He saw a black woman in a nice car and decided he owned her. Remington looked at his lawyer, Wainwright. Wainwright's face was pale. The lavender and old money smell seemed to have soured. He was scribbling frantically, crossing out entire sections of his defense strategy. You can't argue compliance when the victim is tapping out and identifying herself as a Fed. "We need a recess," Wainwright hissed under his breath. "No," Remington whispered back, his voice tight. "You fix this. Tell them the angle was bad. Tell them the audio was doctored." "Mark," Wainwright whispered, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You told me she mumbled. You didn't tell me she identified herself as a federal agent on tape. You're drowning, and you just handed them the anchor." Following the lunch recess, the atmosphere in courtroom 302 had shifted from tension to hostility. The gallery was packed now. Word of the video had leaked to the press outside. The eyes boring into Mark Remington were no longer curious. They were condemning. "The prosecution calls Special Agent Maya Sterling to the stand," Jenkins announced. The doors opened and Maya walked in. She moved differently this time. During the opening statements, she had been the victim. Quiet, still, injured. Now, she walked with the predatory grace of a woman who hunted monsters for a living. She passed the defense table without glancing at Remington, but the air seemed to drop 10 degrees as she went by. She took the stand. She placed her hand on the Bible. She swore to tell the truth. "State your name and occupation for the record," Jenkins said. "Maya Elizabeth Sterling." I am a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, currently assigned to the Organized Crime and Public Corruption Division. Her voice was cool, clear, and commanding. It was the voice of authority. Agent Sterling, Jenkins asked, why were you at the warehouse district on the night of October 14th? Maya turned her head slightly, locking eyes with Remington for the first time. Her gaze was terrifyingly empty. I was concluding a 3-month undercover operation regarding a heroin distribution ring. I had just secured the evidence needed for a multi-state indictment. Was Officer Remington a target of this investigation? No, Maya said smoothly. At the time, he was not on our radar. He was simply an obstruction. Let's talk about the incident, Jenkins continued. When Officer Remington approached you, did you identify yourself? I did. 3 times, twice verbally, and once by attempting to gesture toward my credential case located in my left breast pocket. And how did Officer Remington respond? He applied approximately 180 pounds of pressure to my zygomatic arch and temporal bone, Maya said, using the medical terms with clinical detachment. He cut off the blood flow to my head. He called me a junkie and a bitch. Did you fear for your life? Maya paused. The silence stretched. I have had guns pointed at my head by cartel enforcers. Ms. Jenkins, I have been in knife fights. But yes, I feared for my life, because a criminal acts out of greed or survival. Officer Remington was acting out of hate, and there is no reasoning with hate. Jenkins nodded, letting the jury absorb that. Your witness? Thomas Wainwright stood up. He looked like a man trying to defuse a bomb with a hammer. He buttoned his jacket, forced a smile, and approached the stand. Agent Sterling, Wainwright began, his voice condescendingly sweet. Thank you for your service. Now you say you identified yourself, but in the heat of the moment, with adrenaline pumping, isn't it possible Officer Remington simply didn't hear you? The audio recording suggests his hearing is perfectly functional, Mr. Wainwright. He responded to my statement by claiming he was the Queen of England. A ripple of laughter went through the gallery. The judge banged his gavel. Order. Wainwright tightened his jaw. You are trained in combat, are you not? Hand-to-hand? Disarming techniques? I am. So, if Officer Remington was such a threat, why didn't you stop him? Why did you let him pin you? Unless you were resisting? Unless you wanted a fight? Maya leaned forward. The microphone picked up the rustle of her blazer. Mr. Wainwright, she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. If I had used my training to stop him, your client would be in the intensive care unit, and I would be on trial for assaulting a police officer. I chose to de-escalate. I chose to trust the system. I chose to endure his abuse so that the law could handle him. She gestured to the bruised side of her face. I took the beating because I respect the badge. It is unfortunate that your client used that same badge as a weapon to assault a woman he assumed was powerless. Wainwright flinched. He was losing control. But you were in a high-crime area, dressed in a hoodie. How was he supposed to know you weren't a criminal? Because, Maya shot back. Being in a hoodie is not a crime. Being black in a parking lot is not a crime. And a police officer is trained to assess threats, not invent them. He made a mistake, Wainwright shouted, losing his cool. He's a human being who made a split-second mistake. A mistake is spilling coffee, Maya said, her voice cutting through his shouting like a razor. Kneeling on a woman's face for 4 minutes while she begs for air is not a mistake. It is a choice. It is torture. No further questions. Wainwright practically threw his notepad onto the table. He sat down, red-faced. Remington stared at the table. He felt small. For the first time in his life, the uniform wasn't protecting him. The blue wall of silence was crumbling, brick by brick, dismantled by the woman sitting in the witness box. But Maya wasn't done. As she stepped down from the stand, she paused near the defense table. She looked down at Remington. She didn't whisper, but her voice carried just enough for him to hear. "You picked the wrong girl, Mark, and you're about to find out just how wrong." Remington looked up, startled. It was then he noticed the man sitting in the back row of the gallery, a man in a sharp grey suit, watching Remington with the cold, dead eyes of a shark. Remington recognized him. It was Agent Miller, Internal Affairs, for the FBI. Why was the FBI Internal Affairs here? Maya sat back down at the prosecution table, smoothing her skirt. The trap had been snapped. But the real twist, the real karma, was only just beginning. Because Mark Remington had secrets. Secrets he thought were safe in his locker at the precinct. Secrets that a simple assault charge wouldn't touch. But he had assaulted an FBI agent. And when you assault an FBI agent, the Bureau doesn't just look at the assault. They look at everything. They look at your finances. They look at your texts. They look at the drugs you confiscated and never turned in. Remington felt a wave of nausea. They knew. The fourth day of the trial began with a desperate attempt by the defense to salvage Mark Remington's reputation. Thomas Wainwright knew the video was damning. He knew Maya's testimony was lethal. His only card left to play was character. If he could convince the jury that Mark Remington was a saint who made one bad call, maybe, just maybe, he could get a mistrial. "The defense calls Captain Gary O'Malley to the stand," Wainwright announced. Captain O'Malley was a man cut from the same cloth as Remington, broad-shouldered, red-faced, with a mustache that looked like a bristly broom. He walked to the stand with a confident swagger, glaring at the prosecution table. "Captain," Wainwright asked, leaning on the podium, "how long have you known Officer Remington?" 15 years, O'Malley grunted. "I was his training officer. Best rookie I ever saw. He has a commendation file 3 inches thick. He's saved lives. He's delivered babies in the back of patrol cars. He is a pillar of this community. And in all those years, have you ever seen him act with malice? With racism?" "Never," O'Malley lied. He said it with the conviction of a man who had buried 100 complaints. "Mark Remington doesn't see color. He sees the law." Remington sat up straighter. "This is working," he thought. He saw the floral dress juror nodding slightly. They wanted to believe in the hero cop. They didn't want to believe the monster on the tape was the real him. "Thank you, Captain," Wainwright said. "Your witness." Sarah Jenkins didn't stand up immediately. She sat there, reviewing a fresh manila folder that had just been handed to her by the man in the grey suit, FBI Agent Miller, who had walked in moments ago. The paper inside was still warm from the printer. She stood up slowly. She didn't look at O'Malley. She looked at Remington, and for the first time, she smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who just found the jugular. "Captain O'Malley," Jenkins said, approaching the stand, "you supervise the evidence locker at the 4th precinct, correct?" O'Malley blinked, confused by the pivot. "I do." "And you are responsible for signing off on all drug seizures made by your officers?" "I am." "And you trust Officer Remington implicitly?" "With my life." Jenkins opened the folder. "Captain, are you aware that at 6 a.m. this morning, federal agents executed a search warrant on Officer Remington's private residence?" The courtroom erupted. "Objection!" Wainwright screamed, knocking his chair over as he stood up. "Relevance! This is a trial for assault, not—" "Goes to credibility, Your Honor," Jenkins shouted back, her voice booming. "And motive. The defense has opened the door by testifying to the defendant's impeccable character and adherence to the law. The people have the right to impeach that character. Judge Harper banged his gavel so hard the wood handle cracked. Chambers. Counsel, in my chambers. Now. 10 minutes later, the jury was brought back in. They looked confused, sensing the shift in the air. Remington looked pale. Wainwright looked like he was about to vomit. Judge Harper looked at Jenkins. You may proceed with your line of questioning, Ms. Jenkins, but tread carefully. Jenkins turned back to O'Malley, who was now sweating profusely. Captain, Jenkins said, holding up a document. This is an inventory list from the FBI raid conducted 3 hours ago. Can you explain why 3 kilos of heroin, bearing the evidence tags from a bust Officer Remington conducted 6 months ago, were found in Officer Remington's basement safe? O'Malley's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I don't know. The tags are signed by you, Captain, but the drugs were never logged into the locker. They went home with Officer Remington. Jenkins turned to the jury. The defense wants you to believe Officer Remington was patrolling that warehouse to protect the city. The evidence suggests he wasn't patrolling. He was shopping. He was there to steal from the very dealers he was supposed to be arresting. And when he saw Maya Sterling, he didn't see a threat to his safety. He saw a witness to his corruption. Remington slammed his fist on the table. That's a lie, he roared, breaking his silence. I was doing my job. Sit down, Mr. Remington, Judge Harper bellowed. He's lying. Remington pointed at O'Malley. He signed off on it. He took a cut too. The courtroom went into absolute chaos. Wainwright buried his face in his hands. Remington had just confessed in open court, dragging his superior down with him. Maya Sterling sat at the prosecution table, absolutely still. She watched the snake eat its own tail. This was the karma. The assault charge would put him in prison for 10 years. The federal drug trafficking charges, they would bury him under the jail forever. After the chaos of O'Malley's testimony and Remington's outburst, the defense was in tatters. Wainwright tried to move for a mistrial, claiming his client was mentally unfit. Judge Harper denied it immediately. Remington, driven by a narcissist's need to control the narrative, demanded to take the stand. Mark, don't, Wainwright whispered, defeated. You've already said too much. Pleading the fifth is your only option. I can fix this, Remington hissed. I just need to explain. They'll understand. He walked to the witness stand. He didn't look like a cop anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. Sarah Jenkins approached him. She didn't need notes this time. Mr. Remington, she began, you claimed on the video that you feared for your life because Miss Sterling reached for her waistband. Correct? Yes, Remington said, his voice tight. She made a furtive movement. You also claimed she was loitering in a high-crime area. She was. Mr. Remington, Jenkins leaned in, we know why you were at the warehouse. We found the text messages on your burner phone. You were meeting a contact to sell the drugs you stole from the evidence locker. Isn't that true? I invoke my Fifth Amendment right, Remington stammered. You can't pick and choose, Mr. Remington, Jenkins said coldly. You're testifying to your state of mind during the assault. You claimed you were acting as a police officer. I am putting it to you that you were acting as a criminal. You attacked Agent Sterling because she was standing between you and a payday. She looked like a thug, Remington snapped, losing his temper again. She was wearing a hoodie. She didn't look like a Fed. If she had just looked like a normal person, none of this would have happened. A normal person? Jenkins paused, letting the silence stretch. You mean a white person? I mean someone who belongs in a nice car, Remington shouted. "Not someone like her!" The gasp from the jury was audible. He had just said the quiet part out loud. Jenkins nodded slowly. She had what she needed. She walked back to her table and picked up a piece of paper. "One last question, Mr. Remington. When you were kneeling on her neck, and she told you she was a federal agent, did you believe her?" Remington sneered. The mask was fully off now. "No, I didn't believe her." "Why?" "Because," Remington spat, "the FBI doesn't hire people from the ghetto." Maya Sterling stood up. She didn't ask permission. She just stood up, her FBI badge finally clipped to her blazer, gleaming under the courtroom lights. She looked at Remington, her eyes burning with a cold, terrifying fire. "Actually, Mr. Remington," Maya said, her voice carrying to the back of the room, "the FBI hires people who are smart enough to catch criminals like you. And for the record, I grew up in Brentwood. I have a master's degree from Yale. The only ghetto in this room is the one inside your head." "Objection," Wainwright squeaked weakly. "Withdrawn," Jenkins said, smiling. "No further questions." Remington sat there, stunned. He looked at the jury. They weren't looking at him with doubt anymore. They were looking at him with disgust. The woman in the floral dress was writing furiously on her notepad, underlining something 3 times. As Remington stepped down from the stand, bailiffs moved closer to him. He wasn't walking back to the defense table as a free man on bail. The judge motioned to the bailiffs. "In light of the admission to federal crimes and the outburst in my courtroom," Judge Harper said, "Officer Remington's bail is revoked. He will remain in custody for the duration of the verdict deliberation." Remington froze. "What? You can't do that." "I just did," Harper said. "Take him away." The click of handcuffs echoed in the room, not the cuffs Remington carried, but the cuffs he was now wearing. He looked at Maya as he was dragged out. She didn't look away. She gave him a small, polite nod. The same nod you give a waiter when they take your trash away. The holding cell behind courtroom 302 smelled of stale bleach and old despair. It was a smell Mark Remington had known for 15 years, but only from the other side of the bars. Now, sitting on the cold metal bench, bolted to the concrete floor, the smell seemed to seep into his pores. He looked at his watch, but they had taken it. He looked at his shoelaces, but they had taken those too. He was left with nothing but the ticking clock in his head. The jury had been out for 4 hours. 4 hours is good, he muttered to himself, his knee bouncing nervously. 4 hours means they're fighting. It means someone is holding out, probably the construction worker. He looked like a guy who respects the badge. Thomas Wainwright, his attorney, stood by the heavy steel door, checking his phone. He didn't look confident. He looked like a man calculating how much damage this loss would do to his firm's reputation. "Tom," Remington said, his voice echoing in the small space. "If they come back with a guilty verdict on the assault, we can appeal, right? I mean, the judge was biased. You saw that. Harper had it out for me from day one." Wainwright finally looked up. His eyes were tired. "Mark, you admitted to federal drug trafficking on the stand, in front of a court reporter, in front of the press. An appeal on the assault charge is like worrying about a leaking faucet while your house is burning down." Remington waved his hand dismissively. "The drug thing, I can explain that later. I just need to beat the assault. If I beat the assault, I'm still a cop in the eyes of the public. I can spin the rest." He was delusional. He was drowning in a river of his own making, and he was still trying to critique the water. Suddenly, the heavy lock on the door clanked. A bailiff opened the door. He didn't say, "Officer Remington." He didn't nod with the professional courtesy Remington was used to. "Jury's back," the bailiff said flatly. "Let's go." Remington stood up. His legs felt heavy, like they were filled with lead. He smoothed his suit jacket, trying to summon the arrogance that had carried him through life. He walked out of the cell, down the short hallway, and into the courtroom. The atmosphere hit him like a physical wall. The air was thick, hot, and silent. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters were poised with their pens hovering over notepads. Sketch artists were leaning forward. And in the front row, right behind the prosecution table, sat Maya Sterling. She wasn't looking at him with anger. She wasn't looking at him with triumph. She was looking at him with a calm, terrifying neutrality. It was the look of a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. Remington took his seat. He looked at the jury box. Rule number 1 of the courtroom. If the jury looks at the defendant when they walk in, it's usually good news. It means they see you as a person. Remington scanned their faces. The floral dress woman stared at her hands. The construction worker looked at the ceiling. The retired teacher looked at the judge. Not a single one of them looked at Mark Remington. A cold pit opened in his stomach. Oh God, he thought. They know. All rise, the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harper entered. He looked older today. He moved with a grim solemnity, his robe swishing softly as he took the bench. He didn't look at Remington either. Be seated, Harper said. His voice was gravel. Mr. Foreman, has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood up. It was the young man who worked in IT, the one Remington had thought was weak during jury selection. He held a folded slip of paper. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was clear. We have, Your Honor. Please hand the verdict to the bailiff. The transfer of paper seemed to take an eternity. The rustle of the sheet being unfolded by the judge was the only sound in the room. Judge Harper read it. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened imperceptibly. He handed it back to the clerk. The defendant will rise. Remington stood. Wainwright stood beside him. Remington felt his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Please, he prayed to a God he hadn't spoken to in years. Please, just a hung jury. Just a mistrial. The clerk began to read. In the case of the state of Georgia versus Mark Remington, on count 1, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. The clerk paused. The silence stretched so tight it felt like it would snap. We find the defendant guilty. Remington flinched. It was a physical reaction, like he'd been slapped. A gasp rippled through the gallery, followed immediately by a sharp hush. On count 2, false imprisonment. Guilty. On count 3, violation of oath by a public officer. Guilty. On count 4, filing a false police report. Guilty. On count 5, simple battery. Guilty. It was a sweep, a total, clean sweep. They hadn't believed a single word of his defense. They hadn't bought the fear for his life narrative. They saw him for exactly what he was. Remington slumped. He felt Wainwright's hand grip his elbow, holding him upright. He felt dizzy. The room was spinning slightly. Guilty. The word echoed in his ears. He was a felon. He was no longer Officer Remington. He was inmate Remington. Judge Harper took off his glasses. He looked down at Remington. For the first time, there was fire in the judge's eyes. Mark Remington, Judge Harper said, his voice booming without the aid of a microphone. Throughout this trial, I have watched you. I have watched you smirk at the victim. I have watched you roll your eyes at the testimony. I have watched you take the stand and display a level of arrogance and lack of remorse that is frankly chilling. Harper leaned forward, his hands clasped. You wore a uniform that represents the trust of the people. You were given a gun and a badge to protect the vulnerable. Instead, you used that badge as a hunting license. You saw a woman you deemed lesser than you, and you decided to crush her. You didn't do it because you were afraid. You did it because you thought you could get away with it." The judge picked up his gavel. He wasn't done. "Usually I would order a pre-sentencing investigation and bring us back here in 6 weeks. But the evidence in this case is overwhelming, and the danger you pose to the community is self-evident. You have admitted to federal crimes in my courtroom. You have shown no capacity for rehabilitation." Remington's head snapped up. "No," he thought. "Not now. He can't sentence me now." "On count 1, Harper announced, "I sentence you to 20 years in the state penitentiary." Remington's knees buckled. Wainwright had to use both hands to hold him up. "On count 3, violation of oath, I sentence you to 10 years, to be served consecutively to the first sentence." 30 years. "For the remaining counts," Harper continued, relentless, "sentences of 5 years each, to run concurrently. Mr. Remington, you are sentenced to a total of 30 years in prison. You will not be eligible for parole consideration for 20 years. A scream tore through the room. It was Remington's wife, Linda. She had been sitting in the back, holding on to hope. Now she collapsed into the arms of her sister, sobbing uncontrollably. Remington turned to look at her, his face pale, tears finally streaming down his cheeks. "Linda," he choked out. "Linda, I'm sorry." "Order." Judge Harper banged the gavel. "The defendant is remanded to custody immediately." 2 bailiffs moved in. They grabbed Remington's arms. They weren't gentle. They pulled his wrists behind his back. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting tight. Click, 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 was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of a coffin closing. But the nightmare wasn't over. As the bailiffs turned Remington to march him out, the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a loud crash. 4 men in suits walked in. They moved with a precision that silenced the room instantly. Leading them was Agent Miller, the man from the grey suit who had been watching the trial from the shadows. He walked past the bar, right up to the defense table. He held up a badge, a gold shield. FBI. "Hold him right there," Miller commanded. The bailiff stopped, looking at the judge. Judge Harper nodded. Miller stepped into Remington's personal space. He looked Remington in the eye. "Mark Remington," Miller said, his voice calm and professional. "I am Special Agent Miller with the FBI Public Corruption Task Force. You are currently under arrest." Remington blinked, sweat stinging his eyes. I just got sentenced. I'm already under arrest." "That was for the state charges," Miller said coldly. "That was for the assault on Agent Sterling. This—" He pulled a folded warrant from his jacket pocket. "This is for the rest." Miller began to read, his voice projecting to the cameras at the back of the room. "You are charged with conspiracy to distribute Schedule I narcotics. You are charged with racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations, RICO. You are charged with money laundering. And you are charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, resulting in bodily injury." The gallery gasped again. RICO, that was the mob law. That was the law they used to bury cartels. "We have seized your assets," Miller continued, twisting the knife. "Your home in Marietta is currently being secured by federal agents. Your boat, the Enforcer, has been impounded. Your bank accounts, including the offshore accounts you thought were hidden in the Caymans, have been frozen." Remington looked at Wainwright. "Tom, they can't take the house. Linda and the kids are there." Wainwright was packing his briefcase. He didn't look up. "It's RICO, Mark. It's proceeds of crime. The house was bought with drug money. It's gone. It's all gone." "Tom, help me," Remington pleaded, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. Wainwright clicked his briefcase shut. He looked at Remington with pure disdain. "I'm a defense attorney, Mark. I defend criminals. I don't defend traitors to the badge. You're on your own." Wainwright turned and walked away, leaving Remington standing alone in the center of the storm. "Take him," Miller ordered. The U.S. Marshals stepped forward, taking custody from the bailiffs. They shackled his ankles. They put a belly chain around his waist. He was trussed up like a dangerous animal. As they shuffled him toward the side exit, Remington looked back one last time. He saw Maya Sterling standing up. She wasn't smiling. She just raised her hand and tapped her cheekbone, the spot where he had knelt. It was a reminder. Actions have consequences. The transition from police officer to inmate is a violent psychological break. For Mark Remington, it was a descent into hell. Because of his status as a former cop and the high-profile nature of his hate crime, Remington couldn't go to a normal prison. He was shipped to a maximum security federal facility in Indiana, known for its harsh conditions. He was placed in the SU, Special Housing Unit, solitary confinement. It was for his own protection, the warden said. If he went into general population, the gangs he had spent years arresting and stealing from would skin him alive. His cell was 6 feet by 8 feet, concrete walls, a steel toilet, a thin mattress that smelled of mildew. For the first month, Remington paced. He screamed. He demanded to speak to the warden. He demanded his lawyer. But no one came. The silence was absolute. 23 hours a day in a box, 1 hour a day in a slightly larger wire cage for recreation. He lost weight. The muscle he had built in the gym atrophied. His skin turned pasty and grey. He started talking to the spiders in the corner of the ceiling. Then came the letters. The first letter was from Linda. It was thick. He tore it open with trembling hands, desperate for a connection to his old life. It wasn't a love letter. It was divorce papers. Mark, the handwritten note attached, read, "The FBI took the house. They took the savings. I'm moving back in with my mother in Ohio. The girls are changing their last name to my maiden name. They can't go to school as Remington anymore. The bullying is too bad. Everyone has seen the video. Everyone knows what you did. Do not write to us. You are dead to us." Remington sat on his bunk and wept. He howled until his throat was raw. He had done it all for them, or so he told himself. The drug money, the side hustles. And now, because of his arrogance, he had destroyed the very lives he claimed to be protecting. 6 months later, Remington was eventually moved to a sensitive needs yard. It was a unit filled with other disgraced cops, child predators and informants, the lowest of the low. There was no brotherhood here. The other dirty cops hated him because his stupidity had brought the feds down on everyone. He was pariah among pariahs. One afternoon, during chow time, Remington sat alone at a metal table, picking at a tray of grey mystery meat. He looked up to see a new inmate staring at him, a massive man with tattoos covering his neck. The man walked over. Remington tensed, ready to fight. "You Remington?" The man grunted. "Yeah," Remington whispered. The man spat on Remington's tray. "That's for the girl," the man said. "My sister watched the video on YouTube. Said you laughed while she couldn't breathe." Remington looked down at the spittle on his food. In his old life, he would have broken this man's jaw. He would have arrested him for assault. Now? Now he did nothing. He just pushed the tray away and hung his head. He had no power. He had no badge. He was nothing. A year into his sentence, a guard slid a mail envelope under his door. It was unusual. He wasn't allowed mail from his family anymore. He picked it up. No return address. The postmark was from Washington, D.C. He opened it. Inside was a glossy 8x10 photograph. It was taken at a press conference. There were microphones everywhere. In the center of the photo, stood Maya Sterling. She looked radiant, strong, and powerful. She was shaking hands with the Attorney General of the United States. She was holding a plaque. Even in the photo, Remington could read the engraving, Director's Award for Excellence in Public Corruption Investigations. She had used the case, his case, to launch a nationwide task force investigating police misconduct. She wasn't just an agent anymore. She was a symbol. She was the face of the very change Remington had despised. There was writing on the back of the photo. Remington recognized the handwriting. It was elegant, sharp, precise. To inmate 89402B, it read, "I thought about coming to visit you. I thought about coming to gloat. But then I realized, you aren't worth the price of the plane ticket. You are exactly where you belong. The world is changing, Mark, and you're going to spend the rest of your life watching it change from inside a cage. P.S. My cheek healed. Your reputation never will." Remington stared at the photo. He looked at Maya's eyes. They were the same eyes that had looked up at him from the pavement. The eyes he had ignored. He crumpled the photo, intending to throw it in the toilet. But he stopped. He smoothed it back out. He taped it to the concrete wall of his cell. He kept it there not out of anger, but out of penance. It was the only thing in the cell that was real. It was the face of his karma. Every morning when he woke up on the hard steel bunk, looking at the grey walls of his 30-year coffin, the first thing he saw was Maya Sterling smiling. And every morning, Mark Remington had to admit the truth he had denied for so long. The badge didn't make him a man. His choices did. And his choices had left him with nothing. Mark Remington thought his badge gave him the power of a god. He thought he could judge, punish, and silence anyone who didn't look like him. He didn't realize that true power doesn't come from a uniform. It comes from integrity. He knelt on the face of justice, and he was shocked when it stood up and fought back. This story isn't just about one bad cop. It's a reminder that no one is above the law. It's a testament to the fact that arrogance is the architect of its own destruction. Maya Sterling didn't just survive. She triumphed, proving that dignity and truth are stronger than brute force and hatred. If you enjoyed this story of intense drama, courtroom battles, and satisfying karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who loves to see justice served, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We post new, true-to-life dramas every week. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.